In essence, this concept of being alone, being unmonitored, finally having some privacy, finally having some freedom. And what we realize sometimes when we go off to college, when we go to our schools and where we're no longer under the eye of our parents, what we realize sometimes is that when we were growing up, we really didn't have taqwa of Allah. We kind of had taqwa of our parents, but we didn't have taqwa of Allah. Because it exposes you, because now all of a sudden you're alone. All of a sudden you have the chance to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of a sudden you are your own man, you are your own woman, and all of these temptations start hitting you from the right and from the left, from behind you and from in front of you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposes either your true taqwa or your lack thereof. And this hadith, by the way, why were these three men in the cave in the first place? Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah, he says that there was a storm, so it's not like these three guys just went to a cave and started, having a bonfire or something like that and started talking. There was a storm that forced these three men into a cave to shelter themselves from the storm. And during that storm, the stone had moved, the rock or the boulder had moved to shut the cave. And that's when they started to make this deal to invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with their good deeds. Now what you'll notice about this situation, the second situation, it's unlike the first one. Why? Was the first situation about a man who did a good deed, or was it about a man who left a sin? A person who did a good deed. Okay, he did a good deed for his parents. This person that I'm talking about right now is someone who did not do a good deed. He just happened to leave a sin. But he considered it a good deed. He considered it a good deed, and so did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because when he made the dua, the boulder did move. So that was a sign of acceptance of that. And as we read, this second person, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, he said, "Oh Allah, I had a cousin who was the dearest of all people to me, and I wanted to have intercourse with her, but she refused. Later she came across hard times during a year of famine, and she came to me, and I gave her 120 dinars on the condition that she would not resist my desires, and she agreed. When I was about to fulfill my desires," and by the way, just for this, it's important to sort of show you the depth of the situation. The explanation of this hadith is when he says I was about to, it's not that he was talking to her, that he was starting. No, they were already engaged in the act, and he was about to take it to the next level. He was about to take it to the next level. So they were already laying together, just to show you again how intense this was. At that moment, she said to me, "It is illegal for you to violate my chastity except through marriage, except through the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it permissible." He said, "So I realized it was a sin, and I left her, and I even had some gold with me that I left for her." So the 120 dinars and the gold, I left it all over there, and I went away understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbidden this. And then he made that dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, "Oh Allah, if you know that this was done for your sake, please relieve us from this present calamity." So anyway, we get to this situation. There are many things to break down from this hadith. So number one, the fact that this person said twice in the hadith, وَهِيَ أَحَبُّ النَّاسِ إِلَيَّ, she was the most beloved person to me. So this was not just some crush that he developed overnight. This was not just someone that he found attractive. This was someone that he developed feelings for. أَحَبُّ النَّاسِ إِلَيَّ. He says this in the beginning and he says this in the end, to emphasize, I actually had feelings for her. She was the most beloved person to me. This was not someone that just caught me at one night. I was developing my feelings for her. We were getting closer to each other, and I still left it for your sake, oh Allah. Many times what happens in these situations, again, we go off and we have some privacy. We start developing a relationship, sometimes subconsciously. Sometimes it comes through an MSA, through an organization, through YM, maybe whatever it is, and we start sending Facebook messages to each other, and we start adding those little smiley faces all the time, and we start saying different things. We start becoming a little bit more flirtatious. We start laughing a little bit more with each other. We start developing feelings for each other. And it's kind of understood that, you know what, I'm going to marry you and you're going to marry me. Now the problem with all of that is that you start talking and you're still convincing yourself, or rather shaitan is telling you, look, you're not doing anything wrong. Alhamdulillah, you didn't do this. And then when you do that, then shaitan says, well, it could have been a lot worse. Alhamdulillah, you didn't do that. So, you start talking, you start meeting in public, maybe with a group of friends. Then you start meeting alone. Then you start tapping each other on the shoulder. Then you start maybe, touching a little bit, but you're not getting completely intimate. Then you go to the parents. You see the problem with the equation here? Then you go to the parents and you act like nothing ever happened. And then the daughter says, Dad, this guy wants to marry me. What do you think? And he says, I don't like him. He's not Hyderabadi. Or I don't like him. He's not from Palestine. Or he's not from Karachi. Or he's not this, he's not that. Or I don't like him, he hasn't finished enough of his education. Then the tragedy starts from there. But wait a minute, I love him. I can't let him go. What do you mean? Is that all? Isn't that hadith about the wali? Can I find something in the Hanafi fiqh that says I don't need a wali? How can I get around my parents now? Let me find an imam who's going to do this marriage. Let me see how I can get around this now. You start creating your own fiqh and customizing your relationship with Allah to conform with the haram relationship that you already established with someone else. And then you want to say Islam is not fair. Why does Islam say that the parents have this authority? Why does Islam say this? Why does Islam say that? Why is this happening to me? But I love him. I love her. I can't let it go. You shouldn't have developed the relationship in the first place. If the equation was proper, then you wouldn't have found yourself in the dilemma that you're in. And then you say, but I can't live without her. I can't live without him. It's your fault. You started it. You developed. You allowed yourself to develop that relationship. So now for the sake of saving your other relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the second most important relationship with your parents, you need to sacrifice the one that is grabbing your heart at that moment. So he allowed himself to develop feelings for her. And he didn't stop it at its root. Now, is it permissible in Islam to marry your cousin? I know it's gross and disgusting in America because we're Americans and we see it as weird. But is it permissible? Yes. So could he have approached this the right way? Yes, but he didn't. He allowed the feelings to develop. The other thing, وَهِيَ أَحَبُّ النَّاسِ إِلَيْهِ, whenever you're developing that feeling, don't allow yourself to be alone, al-khalwa. Don't allow yourself to be alone with that person, whether it's physically or whether it's virtually. Cyber khalwa, chatting, emails, text messages, whatever it is, don't allow yourself to be alone. And the scholars say, if you have feelings for that person, then don't allow yourself to be in their company, even if there is no khalwa whatsoever. Even if there is no seclusion, because it's dangerous for you at that point, so you need to exercise some boundaries. You need to separate yourself from the situation because you are developing feelings for that person now. Another thing, and this was something that personally one of my scholars, Sheikh Omar al-Ashqar, hafidhahullah, I remember back in one of the conferences, and I was a kid, but it was the Maya conference. They used to have the Muslim Arab Youth of America. And they used to bring, before America used to, not allow scholars to come here, used to have serious ulama coming from all over the world to this country, having major conferences that couldn't be held anywhere in the Muslim world. And there was once a qarar, there was once a decision from the scholars of Maya that a young man, because obviously they were addressing a group of immigrants, young men that were coming here to start their lives, and they were college students, that no young man should live alone. Either he gets married or he gets a roommate. Because once you're alone, shaitan can start playing games with you. It starts to open the doors for things. Some of the scholars, and I'm not even going to say their names because they're banned now, some of the scholars went so far to say that it was haram. That it would be haram in the situation that we are in now, because so many youth were coming from the Muslim world and they were in a strict situation. All of a sudden now, they had this free world, and all of a sudden they were opening themselves up to so many different forms of haram. They destroyed themselves. So the point is, don't allow yourself to be in close contact with that person. But the heart of all of this, The heart of all of this is the concept of muraqabah. The concept of being watched, of being observed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is observing you. As Imam ibn Qudama rahimahullah said, أَنْتَ تُرَاقِبُ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ يُرَاقِبُكَ. You are observing Allah and Allah is observing you. You're observing His presence by worshiping Him as if you can see Him and He sees you. So you are observing Him and He's observing you. All of a sudden, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created a cover for you. Allah created a cover for you. All of a sudden now, you're off to school. You're independent. You've got your own car. Your parents are not giving you curfews. You have your own time alone. You can be with certain people. You can do certain things that were off limits. And Shaitan wants you to experiment. It's only natural. He wants you to experiment. But at that moment, you need to make sure that you're observant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah is watching you, because the peak of hypocrisy and the worst of people in the sight of Allah, as the Prophet ﷺ said, is Dhul Wajhain, one who is two-faced. One who is two-faced. Not two-faced in the sense that he tells you one thing and he goes to another person and says another thing. That you're a totally different person. Literally, you have two faces. You have one with your parents and one outside. You have one with the masjid and one for school. Now we have multiple faces. Multiple faces through social networking, mashallah. Multiple faces. You could create 5 different profiles for yourself. Okay, and subhanallah, you could portray yourself as something that you are totally not. But that shows that you're no longer observing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, one of the scholars, one of the poets, he said, فَإِذَا خَلَوْتَ فِي رِيبَةٍ وَالنَّفْسُ دَاعِيَةً إِلَى تُغْيَانٍ. And then whenever you find yourself under a cover and the soul, the self starts to call you to rebellion, then remind yourself, إِنَّ الَّذِي خَلَقَ الظَّلَامَ يَرَانِي. The one who created darkness, the one who created the cover that's on me right now, sees me right now. The one who created that for me in the first place. I had youth that would be in the masjid whenever they're trying to get into med school, making dua. I'm telling you, doing i'tikaf in the masjid, that they pass their MCATs, that they're going to get into this med school. Once they got to med school, they started dating. They started establishing relationships. Their parents sent them off. MashaAllah, now they're in the dorm. And for another time, Allah created a cover for you. Allah gave you a blessing of going to school. Allah gave you a blessing of having a social life. And then you use that cover that Allah gave you. You use that blessing that Allah gave you to disobey Him. So remind yourself, the one who created this cover for me in the first place, He sees me right now. So it's not about who else sees me. I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching me. I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who gave me, if I have beauty, Allah who gave me this beauty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching me at this point. So for you to have Allah bless your relationship, you need to leave that relationship and you need to seek forgiveness from Allah, repair your relationship with Him and repair your relationship with your parents. And then if later on down the line, if when your mind has become free of those impurities from those thoughts, you think to yourself, that's the best person for me in my deen, then you go through the proper channels. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help you all, because it's tough. I know. May Allah help you all, because it's tough. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I really feel for you, and I understand that our cultures just suck when it comes to this. Let's face it. But that's Allah testing you a little bit more. Take the test, inshallah. And with any test, when you pass the test, it's that much sweeter. It's that much sweeter, wallah. Take you a few more years to get married, but once you get married, and that's the only person you've ever shared your secrets with, that's the only person you got close to, it's that much sweeter.